Imagine you have no electricity, no TV, no cell phone, nothing. You're living in the 1800s, and everything you know is that whatever you build with your own hands, that's literally everything you have. Your brain cannot make logic to future life and everything related to it. You don't know anything about electricity, phones, cars, shopping malls, etc. That's because you're living in the 1800s. Our today's topic is how the old Amish people survived tornadoes more than 200 years ago, how they fought against it, and how they managed to live through it, just by doing these things that nowadays are much more different. Let's jump into it. Here is what most people assume when they hear that question. They picture terrified families with nothing but luck on their side, huddled in a wooden farmhouse while a tornado tore the roof clean off. That picture is almost entirely wrong. The Amish communities of the early 1800s, stretching across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and later Indiana, had something that most of their neighbors did not, and it had nothing to do with technology. It was an inherited, carefully organized system of preparation built into how they constructed every building, how they rid the land, and how their community functioned the moment disaster arrived. And the twist is this. Much of what they relied on, modern emergency management has quietly rediscovered and now recommends in principle, even if no one is handing the credit back to those 19th century farmers. So why did the Amish specifically survive tornado events at rates that drew comment even from outside observers at the time? The answer starts underground. By the 1820s and 1830s, Amish settlements in Lancaster County and Holmes County were already following a practice that came directly from their Swiss and German Mennonite ancestors. Every home had a root cellar, and that cellar was dug deep. Not shallow storage pits, but fully excavated rooms, often 6 to 8 feet below ground level, reinforced with stone walls and a heavy wooden door that opened downward into the earth. They were originally intended for food storage across winter, keeping vegetables, preserved meats, and canned goods at a stable temperature year-round. But those same cellars became the single most effective tornado survival structure that existed in North America in that era. A tornado with wind speeds approaching 200 miles per hour can lift a frame house entirely off its foundation and deposit it a quarter-mile away. It cannot reach 6 feet underground. The physics are simply not there. And the Amish knew this not because they had studied meteorology, but because the knowledge had been passed down through communities that had already watched wooden structures fail and stone-lined cellars hold. Now here is something that almost nobody mentions when this topic comes up. The Amish did not just survive the tornado itself. They survived the weeks after it, and that distinction matters enormously. When a tornado struck an Amish settlement in the 1800s, the community response was immediate and organized in a way that had no equivalent among isolated pioneer families living without that social structure. The concept they lived by was called Gelassenheit, a German word that roughly translates to yielding, or submission to the community over the individual. In practical terms, it meant that every family in a settlement considered the welfare of every other family to be their direct personal responsibility. So when a tornado took down a barn or a home, the surrounding families did not wait for an authority to organize relief. They arrived the next morning with tools, lumber, food, and labor. Barn raisings that modern observers find remarkable were not a spectacle. They were the storm recovery system. A structure that might take one family months to rebuild alone could be standing again in a single day with 40 men working together. So how did they know a tornado was coming in the first place? Without radar, without a weather radio, without any of the warning systems that exist today. This is where it gets genuinely interesting. Amish farmers of the 1800s were extraordinarily attentive to the natural environment in ways that most people living today have simply lost the habit of noticing. They read the sky the way a sailor reads water, and the signs they watched for were real and scientifically valid. A greenish or yellowish tint to the afternoon sky, particularly in late spring and summer, indicates that large hail is present high in a cumulonimbus storm cell, which is itself a precursor to the rotation that produces tornadoes. A sudden and unusual stillness in the air after a period of heavy wind, combined with a sky that drops into a strange dark calm, was understood by experienced farmers as a signal to move the family immediately. The sound of a distant roar described consistently across 19th century accounts as resembling a large freight train, even decades before freight trains were common enough to be a familiar comparison, told them that the funnel was already on the ground. They did not need a warning siren. They had 70 years of inherited, community-verified observation to draw from. Now, the buildings themselves deserve a closer look, because the Amish approach to construction in the 1800s had structural features that were not accidental. Amish barns of the period were generally built into hillsides, a design choice that reduced wind exposure on at least one side and anchored the structure partially into the earth. The four-bay barn style common in Pennsylvania German settlements extended the upper floor over the lower level, creating a sheltered space below that was naturally more protected from lateral wind forces. Stone foundations were standard, not optional, and the stones were mortared with lime-based compounds that, while not as rigid as modern concrete, had enough flexibility to absorb ground movement without catastrophic cracking. Rigid structures snap under tornado pressure. Structures with slight give, held together with heavy mass rather than sheer tensile strength, perform differently under that load. The Amish built heavy because they built for permanence, and permanence accidentally made their structures harder for wind to destroy. Their home layouts also followed a consistent pattern worth noting. Interior rooms placed at the center of the structure, away from exterior walls, were used for sleeping and for gathering the family in any emergency. Those rooms had no windows, which meant no flying glass, and multiple layers of interior wall between the family and the outside. It is almost exactly the guidance that FEMA now gives for shelter in place, tornado protection in a home without a basement. The Amish arrived at the same conclusion through accumulated experience rather than engineering analysis. There is one more piece of this that rarely gets discussed, and it may be the most important of all. The Amish relationship to material loss was fundamentally different from the relationship most Americans had to property, and that difference had direct survival consequences. When a tornado approached, an Amish family did not hesitate trying to save furniture, tools, or livestock at the cost of precious seconds. The community ethic of Gelassenheit specifically discouraged excessive attachment to physical possessions. The theology and the practical survival strategy lined up perfectly. Get the people underground, let the things go, rebuild together afterward. Families who delayed taking shelter to retrieve valuables or move animals faced dramatically higher risk. The Amish cultural framework removed that hesitation almost entirely. They went underground, and they went quickly. Records from the mid-1800s in Holmes County, Ohio, describe tornado events that leveled neighboring farms, while the Amish settlement nearby lost barns and outbuildings, but reported no fatalities across multiple incidents. Outside observers at the time attributed this to fortune or to the will of God, which is also how the Amish themselves would have described it. But looking at the structural choices, the community organization, the deeply practiced environmental reading, and the cultural removal of hesitation at the critical moment, what those communities had was something far more reliable than luck. Amish tornado survival in the 1800s was not a mystery. It was the product of deep roots, literally and figuratively. Cellars dug into the earth, buildings anchored into hillsides, knowledge passed from parent to child across generations, and a community structured so that no single family ever faced the aftermath alone. That combination, preparation before, immediate shelter during, and organized recovery after, is still the framework that emergency managers across tornado-prone states teach today. It just took the rest of the country about 200 years to work its way back around to what those 19th century farmers already knew.